And please join me in welcoming the people who made it. First, we have our director, our writer, our executive producer, Tina Satter. We have our producer, Noah Stahl. And we have our editor, Jennifer Vecchiarello. So I think this might be the truest true crime film ever made. I mean, I heard that even you were so faithful to the transcript of this interaction between Reality Winner and these FBI agents that even the coughs that we see in this film were in the script.
That's true. I mean, the transcript was this, to me, an incredible document. I had never read a transcript of an FBI interview, or I don't think any transcript, and I couldn't believe the first time I stumbled upon it to see those coughs, all the stutters were noted. It just felt like this incredibly rich document. But yeah, and then Josh Hamilton got very into making sure he nailed the coughs. So, yes.
Did he ever cough too hard? And he was like, I'm sorry, that was a quieter cough. It should have been more of a throat clearing.
Josh likes a couple takes. Like, he's like, one more. And some of it might have been to refine the cough a couple times.
Well, Tina, I want to jump back a step and just talk about the origin of this project. I mean, this is an encounter that has been on your mind for a really long time. You read the transcript, you staged it first off-Broadway, then on Broadway, you put a section of it on This American Life, and now it is a film, and I want to know, what is it about this kind of showdown, I might use that word, between a 25-year-old girl and 9 men, 11 men, I'm not even sure how many men, countless numbers of men walking around her house that really just stuck with you, that said, I need to figure out what this project is?
I mean, it was 11 men ultimately that were there that day, but it's kind of, even when you just lay out that, it was this young woman going head to head with 11 armed men in her home. I mean, on that level, I was like, wait, what? That's so fascinating. This girl in jean shorts is gonna go through, like, that just was something that spoke to me in particular. But how I read the transcript right after I had read an article that had more details on Reality. So then I was like, wait, this is a really interesting young woman in 2017 in America. Like, the things that were really stark and fascinating to me, the military service and the yoga teaching. You know, that really when I read the article, in 2017, was like, oh my God, who would this be right now? And then when I read the transcript and was like, oh, in her own words, I can watch this particular real person go through this, something with geopolitical stakes. It's also like a bizarre coming of age. Like, I just felt really obsessed with how incredible she was as a character, and a character that was real, and that we could go into this room that day, that because they'd recorded it, it was this incredible gift to sort of like see the state at work at that moment in time.
Yeah, to see the state at work. I think I love the way that you're phrasing that. I mean, and is it true that, Jennifer, you actually saw the play on stage before you and Tina really even knew each other?
Yeah, it made the whole experience feel really kind of serendipitous. It was, my husband and I saw it in January of 2020, kind of right before, it was the last thing we saw on stage live before the pandemic shut everything down. And I remember walking away from the theater being like, that was amazing. Like, I knew Reality Winner's name, but that was about as much as I knew of it. I hadn't done that deep of a dive into her story. And I walked away from being like, that was incredible. And then, you know, learning about this later, hearing about the opportunity to work with Tina and bring that just kind of brilliant and absurd and so powerful thing to film, and like see how that translation could work, was really, really exciting.
I mean, this is something I want to learn so much about from all three of you, but I want to start with you, Noah. You know, you're working with a first-time director who, for film, your stage credits are so long, and you have to have these conversations about how are you going to take a stage piece and turn it into a film. Where did those conversations even start? What were the first sort of, oh, wait, how are we going to do this kind of hiccups?
You know, I don't remember the first conversation, but I felt like that was a conversation we were having constantly throughout the process. Like when I had a similar experience as Jen, where I saw it on stage. I didn't know very much about Reality Winner, and I was gobsmacked by that experience of seeing it, and then I became obsessed with reality, which I feel like happens to a lot of us. And I immediately got in touch with Tina, and we began this conversation. And the entire time it was, what can this be? as a movie? How can we use, visual language, sound, all these cinematic tools available to us to make this a distinct thing from the stage play, something that really speaks in a unique voice as a film? And it happened, in terms of every single facet of making the movie. I think the one thing that really stands out to me was when Tina and Jen discovered the redactions, the sort of the disappearance of reality in those moments where that you encounter redaction in the transcript. It was something that we were talking about, I think, from the very first conversations. What is that going to be? How do you express that cinematically? And
Right, because on stage they were a thud, I think I read, just a noise.
Yeah, I mean, there was like a light effect that would kind of that grew throughout the play, and by the end they would just be full blackouts with a slight sound like noise, kind of like a thuddish, but a little more nuanced.
it was very visceral. It was very intense.
It made your stomach drop on the stage.
Truly.
Because it would the whole theater would go dark with that little sonic, yeah.
Well, and the redactions, they seem to become, I mean, to me, they seem almost kind of like a chilling extra layer, because here's a woman who I think has been redacted, because I felt the same way you did when I saw this. Like, I'd heard the name Reality Winner. I knew something bad had happened. I didn't quite know what it was. I didn't know that she'd been convicted this long. I didn't know why she did what she did. I really didn't know her, and the her that's here is so funny. You make her a dimensional person.
That was what was so striking to me from that first read of the transcript. I'm like, this girl's funny. And I had this gut instinct. She was like, from reading her language and that, like, she was like in on the very, very dark cosmic joke of this happening. And then like having now, talked to reality in real life, which was years after I first started working it, I think that's true. I mean, it's been very traumatic for her to have gone through what she went through with that event and then spending the 4.5 years in prison. But she is a very, very funny person, actually, her personality, yeah.
I mean, so with that in mind, like, what made Sydney Sweeney write for this? And was her version of reality even a little bit different than what was on stage?
Her version's so different than what was on stage. And I mean, I think there's such different mediums, and the athletics of the actress who's incredible, Emily Davis, who would step on the stage and have to go through that whole thing without leaving stage and do it in an hour. I mean, and did an incredibly nuanced performance. But yeah, it's very different what Sydney was doing. But even, I think, to your question, sort of who they made reality was really different. Because to me personally, as an artist making any of these forms, I'm interested in, like, not, oh my God, this is the perfect reality, but how is this channeled through this really incredible actor's vision and body and voice, right? And so with Sydney, she's very close to the age. I mean, she was the age when we filmed that reality was when she did, which is so young. It's 25 to me is just so shockingly young to go through that and hold your own through that. And so she literally has that in her body and being. And from the first time I spoke with Sydney, that was something really clear that she had. So I think that's something she brings. And then she has this real kind of toughness in it, which I think is really right and real for reality, who had moved through all these male spaces, the military, the NSA, the kind of workout world she was in. And Sydney is able to really physically channel that in these ways in being that I think are really potent for that. She's a girl with a top knot, but she's also had to be a really tough version of the young blonde woman.
Yeah, I mean, I read that she said at one point that she felt like she really understood how reality was raised, or like the climate that raised reality. What did you mean by that?
That when I first met Sydney, which was on Zoom, she hadn't even read for the part yet, but it was sort of just this like get to know you meeting. And she, like, reality is raised in Texas, like not on like the coast, like from her very iconoclastic, like smart father, but they're not like normal. You're gonna go to a fancy college and there was a way they were very literate, very into like an intellectualism, but almost like a libertarianism, but not in the way we would think of it in this very moment. But like, what is your ideas about the world? But you should know what you're talking about, and you should study things. And you form yourself to that. And Sydney came from like the West, like Spokane, Washington, which is, it's not Texas, but it's much more West Coasty. I mean, Midwest, Western than like where I'm from, like New England, East Coast. There's a similar way that Sydney spoke of, like, she knew that kind of like reality was raised in like a clean double wide trailer, and Sydney's like, I have relative, like she just knew this kind of West Coast make yourself sort of idea. And I think I'm not articulating this super well, but they just like sort of, who are you going to be on your own merits, not because of where you were born or what kind of college you're going to go to or this or that, like, which I think is, I mean, of course there's millions and millions of people like that in the United States, but it is also a singular sort of thing, especially for a young woman, truly is, to carve that out. And then, yeah.
I mean, right, you're right now that I think of it, like the kind of person whose parents would name her reality winner. Like you can imagine
Totally,
a whole world about her
totally. It's
behind
given
that.
at birth.
Yeah. But what I think is so wonderful about the craft in this film is, you know, because you're sticking to this transcript, she doesn't ever get to turn to us and be like, here's what I think about the world, or here's how I feel about this. In a way, it's like the shots we get of her bedroom, the things you put together to show in the house. That's what tells us so much about her. Like, I got really stuck on, I think, did I say like a Hello Kitty pillow or something in here? Like, every little thing we see inside her bedroom has to carry so much information that we're not getting otherwise.
I mean, that's what was interesting to me, and then I really would be interesting to, like, because it was conversations with Noah and the producers, like, I was like, I think this can be a character study within this afternoon, right? Like, of not, like, what was really cool about working with you all was that I really wanted to stick as close to that day as possible, and you, I believe, saw that as a possibility, but then I remember very meaningful conversations, but how do we crack it open a little bit, like the flashbacks?
Yeah. I mean, you know, we all responded so strongly to the transcript and like that being a kind of container for the story, and then thinking about, okay, again, as a movie, what does this want to be? What are the opportunities? You know, the play was staged in a blank space, essentially. And I, you know, from the first conversation, I remember you talking about how excited you were to see the stuff, the ephemera of her life, and, you know, strange things like she didn't have any furniture. She had piles of books everywhere. She had just, her life was kind of a collage of things that were there. And so, and Reality herself was an incredible resource to us and to Tommy Love, our production designer, figuring out how do we fill Reality's house with as much of the stuff that was in her house as possible. How do we make this a kind of canvas, a representation of who she was on that day, and then opening it up a little bit, how do we find, we ended up, the movie set in Georgia. Her experience was in Georgia. For budget reasons, we had to shoot the movie in New York, and so we were scouring around Staten Island and Yonkers trying to find, how do we find these little slivers of this place that feel as much like Reality's world as possible, as true to the experience, the environment, all of that stuff, to put us as much as possible in her world that day.
I mean, just one more thing to say on showing those details, like the Hello Kitty pillow or it was so striking to me always how vulnerable it would be to have that conversation in your own home, but in your bedroom. Like, she doesn't know they're coming over. It's just such a vulnerable encounter that unfolds. It's like in your most private space. And so to show what was actually there that day, that unannounced, this conversation unfolds, felt really important.
I always think about that moment in the movie where she's putting her groceries in the refrigerator, and in the movie we have the waveform, the sound of just her literally rustling her stuff between these 11 men who are occupying her kitchen, just trying to get her kale into the fridge. And like, that was a moment of that day, of that whole experience that she went through.
And that, I mean, we keep talking, but Reality, that is a detail she told me that none of them helped her. Like, so I did ask her sort of some detailed questions, and she said that they just all stood there where she could barely carry these bags and took. So I was like, that's amazing. It's very, like, that's great for our story. like amazing. I didn't know that. I would have maybe had one of the guys carry one of the bags for you. And so it was a really cool detail to get from her.
Well, one of the interesting things that happened with this transcript is when the trial started, there's something in this movie that we don't hear that got brought up by the lawyers, which is we don't hear the FBI read her Miranda rights. We don't hear her realize she can ask for a lawyer. And her defense was saying she should have had her Miranda rights read. They were saying it was just a conversation. We were just having a friendly conversation and trying to draw a line that it wasn't an interrogation. And they kept making the point on trial that she could have felt free to leave at any time, which I feel like in the way that you shoot this, you make some really smart choices that make us feel she did not feel free to leave. She feels really confined.
Yeah, I mean, they technically would call that, like what I learned in making all this was that's called a non-custodial interview. So because she could have, that's their defense, and it's really legal. Actually, it's sound in such dark, creepy ways, I guess, but she could have left. But like, as she, I mean, told me, and then years before I was able to talk directly to reality, I had been in touch with her mom. By then they've taken her car keys, like they have her phone. I mean, she could have said no to all those, but that's just not how that conversation's, they are setting that up, so it's almost humanly impossible to find the thing in your brain to say, I won't hand the armed man my phone, and I know I've done something wrong, you know. So she had no free, you know, they've really taken all the means, but they are saying that on the record again and again, so that she could have gone anytime. We told her that, yeah.
What direction did you give the actors who played the FBI agents?
It was really interesting working with the men roles, because we didn't want them. They were always really interesting characters to me in this too. From the first read of the transcript, like these human beings know they're changing this girl's life. That they know they're going to leave there with her, probably admitting, and that is going to drastically like change and ruin her life, ostensibly, right? So they are going through that, and I was always so interested. What do they think talking to this particular kind of person, like this, literally again, the girl in jean shorts who actually can bro down with them about security lingo. Also, they're all veterans of the U.S. Air Force, you know, or a couple of them of the Air Force, and like
They can talk about
yeah,
CrossFit.
totally. She's like able. So I always was so intrigued by what they would think of her, but I guess that came back in the way of like trying to like make those guys actual humans and not just archetypal bad guys, right? And so that was a meaningful conversation with Marchant and Josh, of like, because they're really good, right? And as actors are, and they could. There was a whole bunch of ways we could have done that, where it was like clear they were the bad guys, but it was more interesting to me to let the language do that and let them seem as more like humans doing their jobs. And of course, they have different tones to the you know, that felt interesting to have it have some dynamics. That Marchant's character is a little more of the quiet one who's just going to sort of like, you know, make sure she knows there's another body in the room, but and then there's the like weird kind of like creepy dad thing that Agent Garrick decides to play that day.
Well, yeah, and then there's like the unnamed agent who, I mean, gave the play its original title, right? Is this a room? Is that, which is just such a surreal question.
I know. We share the room. We share the movie a lot in Europe, and I'm like, in English, is this a room is such a weird sentence. Like, no, you don't really ever say that, which is another fascinating thing of the transcript, right? These amazing semantic poetics. But yeah, I mean, just the fact, and it flashes up on the screen, which was something with Jen, help and discovery of that edit, like. That's how the transcript lists the men, was that name unknown male. And that, to me, the first time I read this was like, oh my God, someone named unknown male? Like,
sounds
what
so sinister.
Yeah, totally. Which, of course, I would go on to learn within a couple weeks of like starting to work on the project, was that 9 other men were there. They weren't mic'd, so it was picking up. And so these bizarre non sequiturs, like, is this a room? Do you have a toothpick that just are coming in out of nowhere?
You need a toothpick.
We don't know. I mean, and there's a lot of discussion about that line. Like,
Oh, the toothpick. The toothpick. I dream about the toothpick.
But what I think like you really catch on when you watch this movie is that everybody in here is acting. You know, that the actors that you have are doing 2 layers of acting. That she's acting calm and innocent and nothing's wrong and friendly, and they're acting like everything's also fine. And there's a whole world kind of operating under the surface for everybody in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, totally. That's actually what's very moving to me about working on it with actors, because you get to do this meta thing, and that totally 100% what you said is a conversation we would have. Like, they are all acting that day. Of course, reality is because she's trying to avoid having to say directly what she did. Their job, and we did have one FBI consultant on the movie, this great woman was a former FBI, and she's like, I'm like, so it's kind of like acting on those kinds of visits, and she's like, 100% that is an acting. We are prepared for a very specific version of ourselves with the information so that's really amazing. And the kind of listening they are all doing that day in real life is a really fascinating thing to talk about with actors, because you're always talking about listening, but at any moment in that real conversation, it could have gone in any direction. So there's also this heightened way they're trying to all act casual but listen, that I think is a really cool quality. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I am curious, for Noah and Jennifer, like, you have studied this movie so much in the post-production of this, in the making of this. Is there a little moment that you just absolutely love?
Oh, there's quite a few. I mean, there's that moment when reality is realizing that there's just no other way out, and we're actually on the back of her head, and she's kind of walking around before she turns around and makes, I can't remember the line of dialogue she says right then, but she turns around and she kind of, you see her, after she's turned, you reveal like the mental calculations and gymnastics that have been going on in her head before she starts to say, this is when I sent it, this is when it was. Like right before that confession. That's one of the more gripping ones that I'm like, oh, Sydney just gave us volumes in her eyes and in her face, and like she just, and Paul, who shot the film, like got us right there in her face so we can see every little detail behind the eyes and everything that's going on in her head. But also my other favorite moments are, for sure, just all the humor in there. Every single conversation about the dogs, every single conversation about the cat, like all of that, I just feel like there's so much to mine because it's hilarious and also builds so much tension in this very creepy way that it did on stage, and that I think it did really well in film as well.
I mean, there are the more obvious moments. The moment where she looks directly in the camera and admits, the sort of release of tension that gives way to the tension of the second half of the movie, where she finally says, here's what I did and here's how I did it. It's such a powerful moment from Sydney in her performance, and as Jen said, the way that Paul, framed these shots and the way that Tina was working with Sydney in that moment, it's incredibly powerful. But then, on the other hand, there are all of these like micro expressions from all of the actors, and especially from Sydney. And I remember at a certain point, pretty late into the process of cutting the movie, where I would see these little things that they would find that I'd never seen before in these performances. Sydney arching an eyebrow at a certain moment, and it's like a kind of a private behavioral moment where she's commenting on the strange circumstances, like what these guys are doing. And I don't know, to me that's like an unbelievable testament to Sydney and to Tina and Jen to be able to find these things and to create this really rich performance, this really rich kind of experience of this day. So I don't know, it's the big things and it's the tiny things too.
I mean, I am curious. I'm going to kick this out to audience questions in a second, but for the three of you, have the ideas in this film expanded to sort of, in your own heads, make this movie about something even bigger than just reality herself and her story?
Something that we were talking about recently was reality is, she's kind of a Rorschach test, like reality winner. It's amazing. A lot of people we encounter are kind of obsessed with her. Like, some people don't really know about it, like, oh, who's that? But like a lot of people have really gone down the reality rabbit hole, and they've really strong convictions about like who she is and what her actions meant, And for some people, she's a patriot, and she, what she did was in the public interest. And for other people, it was a irresponsible abuse of her security clearance. And for other people, she was mistreated, she wasn't read her rights. But like, she means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it seems like that continues to evolve. Like as our politics continue to move in erratic, unpredictable directions, like she keeps coming up in the news, and she continues to present opportunities to have conversations about like who we are and what we think of our democracy and the power of the state and all the rest. So.
Do you have one, Jen? Or
I mean, I would agree with everything you said. I think the thing about her is that you cannot put her in a box, no matter how hard you try. And I feel like that's just our instinct or my instinct. I can't speak for everyone, but it's so easy to kind of label people like we're such a polarized nation, democracy, everything right now. And I know exactly where I fall on that. But reality is someone who cannot be defined, and I think that's just what's so fascinating, and that's what's made her such a fascinating topic to so many people. And it kind of reveals more about the person who's judging her than it does about her. But I think she did us all quite a service.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what both of you said, and my final one is just such a huge one that but I didn't ever really think about this so sadly for how long I've been on Earth till really working on this, which is like, how is a democracy supposed to work if you don't allow a real system for whistleblowing? Like that, it's such a big question, but it's like one that sort of feels really, really important to me now after spending time with this. Well, then what do we do if it's supposed to operate that way where civilians can say, I think I see something wrong happening, but yeah.
Right, because in reality's case, like her leaking those documents, some people have said that helped secure the 2018 midterm elections. So it's like there is such a spillover effect. I'm wondering out there who has a question. I'm going to repeat it into the mic because we are recording this, so I want to make sure it gets taped. Yeah, I'll start right here. Yeah, the question was, and I'll just say it, that this is an indie first-time filmmaker's wet dream to have a contained location, be able to shoot this film, and then take it on this path to getting it on HBO.
I'll concur, it was a wet dream. So I had made the play. I had met Noah because he saw the play. So then we started talking, and then I had a first draft. And then Noah, his producing partners, Reva Marker and Brad Becker-Parton, who's somewhere in this room, and Greg Noble, all came on and were like, we do want to do this script, and yes, you can direct it, which was the first part of like the wet dream. You know what I mean? So then we, became this amazing, like they helped me refine the script with some notes, and then it was just sort of in motion. It has a very small budget. It really was a small indie, as you can imagine, and the contained thing I think was helpful, right? Like this is possible, and we did that, and Sydney came on board, and these other great actors, and then amazing collaborators, Paul Yee, the DP, and Jen V, just to call out some of the really important ones, but then have this finished cut. And the thing that then the next amazing step was it got accepted into the Berlin Film Festival and was there in February of 2023, and was really nicely received and well reviewed out of that. And then HBO came on actually after that. They acquired it after that. So, yeah.
Yeah, right here. Yeah, this is about casting Sydney. Did you offer it to Sydney? Was she the only choice? What happened?
Sydney read for the part. Sydney auditioned and put herself on tape in a white Oxford. There was a number of really excellent people that were excitingly, it's a good meaty role, right? And so very excitingly, there were a number of people that were down to read for it. And then, then suddenly Sydney was in the mix, and it was a really kind of unexpected, exciting thing. And like I alluded to, her and I had this first Zoom, and that's when I was like, oh, okay, she's really smart, and she has a way of talking about reality that's very singular and thoughtful, and we're going to be able to talk about this part, and then she read and was great, and so that's how it was Sydney, yeah.
And then there's a practical thing about that which is interesting. I think that conversation happened in January of 2022.
Yes.
Right? And January or early February, and you guys had these great conversations, like, oh my God, let's do this together. And the caveat was that Sydney had to be out by the end of May. And so it was like a dead sprint from the moment that she got involved. And that, I think that, I mean, it was sort of a crazy way to make the movie. We shot the movie in like 16 and a half days. It was bonkers, but it also was helpful in some way. It just sort of made, okay, we have no choice but to do this thing, like here we go. And that energy sort of animated the whole process.
I just remember when we were like, okay, it's gonna happen if we say yes to this, like talking to you and Brad, and you're like, so we have this many weeks of prep, and I'm like, that doesn't seem like enough weeks, and you two were like, it's not, but it can be done. It's been done, but like it may not be, but it might be. So let's go.
I think I saw one right back here. Yes. The question is about how perfectly real the dialogue is, and there is actually a great answer for this.
It's all from the transcript. That every line they say is exactly what was said. So it's from that. And then I think, it's actors giving really nice, smart tonal reads to it. And then editing honestly helps a lot with that. And yeah, and us sort of as a group. But yeah, that is what was said that day. So it did feel sort of surreally funny from the beginning in a way.
I'd like to take one or two more, but kind of on that element of real, I've been really dying to ask this. Do you know what happened to the dog and the cat?
They were fine, yes. I know. Everyone asks. The kitty's a longer story, but was fine. Went to reality has a sister named Brittany, and the cat went to Brittany, and then Brittany's friend. And then the dog was a foster dog. I think she says in the thing, and the dog was adopted. Because reality's mom and stepdad, by the night she was taken away, which is that night, she was then not home for 4.5 years. But they got to Georgia by that night, so they then were with the animals for a few days and got them rehomed, and yeah. So they are good, and yes.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Okay, somebody in the back is yelling way in the back. Is it?
That is reality. Oh, sorry, do you want to repeat it?
Yes, can I? I'll just summarize. The FBI are weird people. And also the car. Tell us about the stickers on the car.
I feel really proud of that car. That is such a reproduction of reality's amazing car. She had those crazy weird, it's to me it felt like a really important fabric of her personality on the back of that car. So she is one of those sticker people. That's a good reproduction. Thank you. And getting that shot in too, because there were some cuts where we didn't know we'd have the back of the car, and I just like, is there a way? So yeah.
That was a priority. We needed that in.
I am curious, who in here is a sticker person? Now I feel like there's like two types of people. There's a fair amount. All right. Last question right here, because you've been so lovely in the blue shirt patiently.
I just got to ask about the snail.
Oh, The snail.
Great snail acting, but did she really see a snail? And was that? Did you just put? I mean, tell me about.
Great snail acting. Was there really a snail? Tell us about the snail. Who is your snail wrangler?
The snail wrangler is a young woman named Shannon Lyons, who was excellent. And there were several snails that played the part, all named Penelope. No, so this is that work of writing the room. Again, all the language is what was said, but I wanted to theatricalize it and keep it going a bit and infuse where I felt it also might have certain things. And so I had written into the screenplay, which was a made-up detail, that reality looks and focuses on a bug, that moment when something really small, you're in an inner trauma and you're like, I'm just gonna, that thing. So I had written a version of that into the screenplay, and then the amazing DP, Paul Yee, did start, and we were shooting so fast, but he would get there early and have Shannon, my assistant, grab any things that she could find, small things that lived in the backyard, like bees or flies, and he would shoot these little and then he had shot the snails, which I actually forgot about until Jen V was combing through footage, and you were like, there's this amazing snail footage for the yeah, we were very excited by the find.
It was a really helpful way to get into reality's head and just to kind of shift the perspective and bring us into her, because that was at a part of the movie where we're really shifting out of reality. Reality is shifting out of reality, and we needed something to anchor us and anchor her, and the snail was perfection for us.
Has there ever been a more perfect title for a film?
I'm happy that it is perfect and works. Yes.
All right, fair enough. Well, on that note, I want to thank all of you for coming out to see Reality. Thank our wonderful cast. Thank our wonderful panel for being up here.
Thank you so much, and thank you all so much for watching and staying to talk with us. It's really cool.